V'amar Reish Lakish, kol ha'meshakeach davar echa mitalmudai, over belav, shenemar hishamar lecha, u'shmar nafshecha ma'od, pen tishkach es hadvarim, asher ro'ei necha. From that pasuk said Reish Lakish, you see that if somebody forgets davar echa mitalmudai, he is over a lav. Ravina said, you're not only over one lav, you're over two lavin. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak said, you're not only over two lavin, in fact, you're going to be over three lavin. And you have to read the fine print, which says that the only time this is true is b'mesira miliba. You have to know what that means. Yachal afilu takfa olav mishnasai. For that already we have the word rak. For sure, in that situation, a person is not going to be over. From our Gemara, it sounds like that this was a discussion amongst the Amayram, the Gedolei Amayram, Reish Lakish, Ravina, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. This Inyan, that if somebody forgets his learning, it's very serious. Over by one lav, over by two lavin, over by gimel lavin. The truth is, the Inyan of there being Isser associated with forgetting one's learning was already discussed by the Tana. In fact, it's a Mishnah. In Pirkei Avos. It's Perek Gimel Mishnah Yud. Rab Dustoi ben Rab Yanai Mishum Rameir Oimer. Rab Dustoi ben Rab Yanai send the name Rameir. If somebody forgets one item of his learning, malin olav, we consider it ki'ilu mischayev benafshay, as if he's chayev misa. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Raki shomer lecha ushmar nafshecha ma'od pentishkach es hadvarim asher ro'ei necha." Yochel said, Rameir, afilu takfa ala mishnasai. Mamash argamar. You would think that even if it was takfa ala mishnasai, Talmud loymar. Upen yasuru milvavcha kol yemei chayecha ha'enoi mischayev benafshoy ad sheyeshev yasirim milibai. But really, the makar to this inyan of it being very chamer for a person to forget his learning is really a mefurish Mishnah. Now, if it's a mefurish Mishnah, so what's Reish Lakish coming to be Mosef? So it's Pashat. The Mishnah didn't say that there's an Isser per se. The Mishnah didn't say that there's a lois assay. From the Mishnah, you see that it's a davar chamer. Malin olav kilo mischayev benafshay, which implies some sort of Isser, obviously. But in terms of what the nature of the Isser is, for sure it didn't mention. That was already a discussion in Amiram. Is it one lav, is it two lavin, or is it three lavin, right? Ein oinchin elon ke mazirin. So on some level in the Mishnah, it was implied already that there's an Isser. What the Isser is, that we don't know. So l'chur, Amiram went, and Amiram did what Amiram always did, and that is, they expanded and they commented. They were mefarish. The Mishnah says, "Malin olav kilo mischayev benafshoy." Vaistois is an iser. What is the iser? Reish Lakish says it's the hishamer. Ravina said it's the hishamer and the pen. And Rav Nachman Yitzchak said it's the two hishamers and the one pen. But the ikar idea of that's something that's rooted in a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, stating that as it relates to this whole shmuz, I think it's kedai to be marchiv the Inyan a little bit and be'ezus Hashem speak out for ha'aras. The first ha'ara is, we've mentioned many times over the years and a few times recently, the Ramban, Hayadua u'mefursim in Parshas Va'atchana. The Ramban on the pasuk Raki Shomer Lecha Ushmar Nafshecha Ma'od Pen Tishkach Esadvar Masheroei Necha says that the yisoid of this pasuk is it's a pasuk that L'daiti is a mitzvahs loisaseh Hizir Ba Ma'od, and it's a loisaseh that the Torah is warning us in a very, very wordy and a very, very intense way. And what is the yisoid of this Isser? The yisoid of this Isser is Shaloi tishkach maimed har Sinai mikol advarim asher ro'u shamei necha hakoylois v'alepidim es kvoidoi v'es godloi udvarim asher shamata sham mitoich ha'ish. A person has an obligation to always remember and never forget Maimed har Sinai. In other words, Ramban says that this pasuk Raki Shomer Lecha Ushmar Nafshecha Ma'od is referring to Maimed har Sinai. Truth is, we kept on reading the pasuk. But really, there's a next pasuk. And the pasuk goes on and describes Maimed har Sinai. Says the Ramban, you want to know what this Isser is? It's a loisaseh. And what is the Yisod of this loisaseh? Thou shalt never forget Maimed har Sinai. L'chura, This Ramban's a murdered Ramban. And this Ramban is related to the Ramban, and then the Parshas Boy, and it's from the Yesoida Chasidus V'Sheirish Avoida Hatmima, as it relates to the Emunah that the Yid has. It's related to Avoid of Leila Seder, v'chulei v'chulei. But at the same time, the Ramban seems to have said a beautiful pshat in a pasuk, the loika, a Gemara Menachos Sadik Tes Amud Beis, and it's the Loika Mishnah in Perek Gimel of Pirkei Avos. So at first glance, the Ramban's a pella. The Ramban goes and the Ramban says, you want to know what this pasuk means? Raki Shamel Choshma Nafshechem Oid. It means Maimed Ar Sinai. Maimed Ar Sinai. We just learned it. It's a Mishnah. In the words of Reish Lakish, it's not the same language, right? But the bottom line is, it's mefurish. It's referring to Torah. You're not allowed to forget your learning. You learn, you have to remember. How could the Ramban come and say that it's referring to Maimed Ar Sinai? Isn't it the loika mefurish a sugya in Shas? Oh, by the way, a mefurish a Mishnah. How is it possible that this is the way the Ramban went ahead? And the Ramban was mefarish. Truth is that at first glance, there'd be mokum to say that when the Ramban said what he said, he didn't mean that all the pasuk means is that you have to remember Maimed Ar Sinai. Avada, the pasuk is saying you have to remember your learning. But in addition to remembering your learning, Yehuda va'oid l'kra, there's another Indian in this pasuk Zakh Ramban, and that is that you have to remember Maimed Ar Sinai. Just to bring out the point a little bit better, right? If you look at the pasuk, Raki Shomer Lecha Ushmar Nafshecha Ma'oid Pen Tishkach Es Hadvarim Asher Ro Einecha Ufen Yasur Milvavcha Kol Yemei Chayecha V'Oidatam Levanecha V'Levnei Vanecha. Poshet, based on the Gemara Menachos and the Mishnah and Avos, what the pasuk is saying is Hishamar L'choshma Nafshem B'choid Pen Tishkach what Es Hadvar Mas Ro Einecha, referring to the Torah. Upen Yasur Milvavcha Kol Yemei Chayecha, the Torah. V'Oidatam Levanecha V'Levnei Vanecha, the Torah. The Ramban went and the Ramban was mechadish, and the Ramban said, read the next pasuk. The next pasuk says Yom Asher Amadat Lefnei Hashem Lekach B'chayrev. In other words, the Dvarim Asher Ro Einecha, that the Torah is saying Hishamar L'choshma Nafshem B'choid Pen Tishkach, is referring not to the words of the Torah, it's referring to Maimed Ar Sinai. Upen Yasur Milvavcha Kol Yemei Chayecha is Maimed Ar Sinai. The V'Oidatam Levanecha V'Levnei Vanecha is Maimed Ar Sinai. The Yom Hashem Amadat Lefnei Hashem Lekach B'chayrev. This is pashut the way you always understand the Ramban. But being that we discovered it's a sugya, the first mahalach, the Ramban can't be oiker legamre the first pshat. What, he's going keneged Reish Lakish, Ravina, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and Rav Meir? It's impossible. How could you even say such a thing? The teretz is, maybe what the Ramban means is the Ramban is saying that there's two things going on in this pasuk. Number one is Raki Shomer L'choshma Nafshecha Ma'oid Pen Tishkach Es Hadvarim Asher Ro Einecha, referring to the Torah. Upen Yasur Milvavcha Kol Yemei Chayecha, the Torah. V'Oidatam Levanecha V'Levnei Vanecha, the Torah. Additionally, the next pasuk, Hishamar L'choshma Nafshecha Ma'oid Pen, is also referring to the Yom Asher Amadat Lefnei Hashem Lekach B'chayrev. So there's two things you have to remember. You have to remember the words of the Torah, and you also have to remember Maimed Ar Sinai. But it's not mashma that way. First of all, if you look at the Ramban, it's not mashma that way. But it's even more not mashma that way. You know why? Because if you take a look in Rashi and Chumash, Rashi on this pasuk, Raki Shomer L'cha Shmar Nafshecha Ma'oid. So Rashi says as follows: Oz kishaloi tishkechu oisam v'tasum ala mitasam techashvu chachamim u'nevonim. If you're not going to forget your learning, you'll be considered chachamim u'nevonim. V'im ta'afsu oisam. If, however, you're going to forget it, mitoich shikha, simply because there's something called shikha, techashvu shoitim, you're going to be considered shoitim. What's Pashup Shana Rashi? How do you even read this Rashi? So this Rashi is really explaining this pasuk behemshach to the previous psukim. If you go back a few different psukim, the psukim say ushmartem v'asisem, you should keep the Torah. Ki chachmaschem uvinaschem leinei ha'amim. Asher yishmon es kalachukim ha'elav v'amru rakam chachav v'novin ha'goy ha'godol hazeh. Ki mi goy godol asher lo yelakim krevim elav kashem elkeinu b'chol kareinu elav. Umi goy godol asher lo yichukim u'mishpatim tzadikim. Rak yishom l'cha shma nafshechem oid. Zok Rashi, you know what this rak yishom l'cha is? It's a tenai in the umay sa'olam looking at the yidden and being impressed. We're saying the Ummah are going to look at the Yidden and they're going to say, wow, they're going to say, I never saw such a nation like this in my life. They're going to be blown away by Klal. So you know when that's going to happen? If you're going to know your Torah. But if you're going to forget your Torah, then not. On that, Zok the Ramban, that Rashi learned that this pasuk Raki Shomer Choshma Nafshechem is not an azara. It's not an azara. What is this pasuk? It's like an asinas tam. It's a caveat. It's the fine print that you want to know when the world is going to be impressed by the Jews. If you're going to remember your Torah, it's a tenai in the Umay Sa'olam saying, Rak am chacham v'nova in agoy agadol hazeh. So Dr. Ramban ve'enoi nochen klal. No, Rashi turned this into like a Tanai in, well, you want to look cool in the eyes of the Umay Sa'olam, don't forget your learning. Dr. Ramban, no way, it's much more serious. This is a loisase. And what is the loisase? It's a loisase that hizir b'ma'od. And it's shaloi tishkach maimin arsina mikol advar mashro shaminech. The Ramban's gish over here is to be masig on Rashi. That Rashi learned it's not a loisase. The Ramban is zikr a loisase. And you want to know what the loisase is? Don't forget Maimin Arsina. You want to know what the loisase is? See Menachas Sadik Test. See the Mishnah of this Paragimel. It's a pli Atzuma. I'll tell you more than that. The Ramban, Hiydua, wrote a commentary on the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs. A sub-commentary that the Ramban wrote to the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs is at the very, very end of the Rambam's Essen and Lavin. The Ramban has a list known as the Shikchas HaEssen and as the Shikchas HaLavin. If you look at Shikchas HaLavin number 2 in the Ramban's Sefer HaMitzvahs, Zok the Ramban, what is number 2? HaMitzvah HaShniya she'nimna'anu shloi nishkach maimin arsinai v'loi nosir oisoi midatenu avol yeh einenu v'libeinu sham kol hayomim. The Ramban goes and he's very ma'irich and he says the same exact shtickle Torah that he wrote in his Pirush al Torah. This is the Ramban l'shitasai in Parshas Vaetchanן. If you look at the Rambam did not mention the Isser of Yisham el-Charshma Nafshchem Hoyd. He didn't mention it in the Nusach of the Gemara Menachas Sadik Tes and the Mishnah of his Paragimel, and he didn't say the Ramban shtickle Torah that he writes in Parshas Vaetchanן. The Ramban was very bothered. How did the Rambam forget this pasuk in the Torah? Hishomer pen va'al is a loisase. There's an Isser in the Torah. There's a lav that, pun intended, the Rambam forgot, right? There's a shikras halav over here. Which lav? The lav of shikra. And fake the Ramban, what's going on over here? But when the Ramban was masik on the Rambam, he was only masik that he left out the lav, not to forget Maimed Har Sinai. If la'olam the Ramban holds that there's 2 lavin, and the Ramban is just being moisef, he's just being moisef on what the Gemara Menachis and the Mishnah and Ovis is saying, then l'chayr was the Ramban will get out fragen, it's zwei Sachen. Rambam, you forgot a pasuk in the Torah. Oh, it sounds to me, you know what he should have said? You're learning like Rashi, that this is not really a loisase, which could be pshat in the Rambam. But it sounds to me like you're learning like Rashi. And if that's the case, how do you learn like Rashi? This is a very important lab. And by the way, lichten them zwei Sachen. No, he only brought the second thing. In his asaga, he was supposed to. So aside from the Ramban's asaga and Rashi in his Pirush al Torah and Parshas Vaetchanן, and aside from the Ramban's asaga and the Rambam and the Shikras Halavin, it's very mashma from the Ramban that Ramban held there's only one mitzvah, and that one mitzvah is not the mitzvah that's discussed in Menachas Sadik Tes, and that's discussed in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos Paragimel. I think it's a Kושי עצומה on the Ramban, and we're going to leave that as the first Ha'ara.